This is the Law 401 podcast, legal issues decoded for you, brought to you by Roger Williams University School of Law. Hey, everybody. My name is Nicole, and I'm one of the co-hosts of the new Law 401 podcast, where we decode legal issues. So Legal Issues Decoded. I'm here with my co-host, MDB.
Hi, I'm Michael Donnelly-Boylen. I am Nicole's co-host and partner in crime as we try to talk to Rhode Islanders about the issues affecting their states in ways that are legally oriented, but in ways that they can understand. I'm not a lawyer.
I am a lawyer and a law professor and a librarian, and also we try to lean into the fun where appropriate, or sometimes inappropriate.
Where appropriate.
I'm working on it.
You are.
What are we talking about today?
We're talking about book bans and the fight to stop them. You might have seen national headlines about school boards pulling titles from shelves. But right here in Rhode Island, there's a push to protect our freedom to read.
So today's topic is one, like I said, that is near and dear to my heart. The freedom to read. As a podcast host, I hope to be spending more time asking questions than giving my opinion, but I have to be forthcoming about today's episode. The issue of book banning or book censorship is not one that I feel like I can stay quiet about. I am not neutral. I'm an advocate, and me and today's guests have been advocating for a freedom to read bill in Rhode Island. I feel really strongly. I feel really excited about today's discussion. And so let's get to it. Today's guests are a lawyer and a librarian. Dan, who is our first guest remotely, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi. Yeah. So I'm a lawyer and you're a librarian and a lawyer. So I feel a little bit, under-credentialed for this conversation. But I am an attorney in the legal department at Penguin Random House, the world's largest trade publisher. And I've had the distinct privilege of working on anti-censorship efforts across the country the last couple of years.
And you're like a super amazing First Amendment lawyer. I've been like so impressed by how calm and cool you are during times of stress, and also how weirdly detail-oriented you can be. Cheryl, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, absolutely. So my name is Cheryl Space, and I'm the library director of the Community Libraries of Providence, which is 9 neighborhood libraries around the capital city. And in addition to that, I am the co-chair of the Rhode Island Library Association's Legislative Action Committee. So that is how I got deeply involved in the Freedom to Read bill this year.
So Cheryl and Dan, let me start with a pretty basic level question. What is the Freedom to Read movement? And why is the censorship of books right now such a contentious issue in the United States of America?
I think what we need to remember is that libraries really are a marketplace of ideas where borrowers have the complete freedom to select, read, and take home the books that resonate and matter to them, the books that they would like their children to take home. And the reason it's particularly contentious right now is because there's been an alarming rise in the attempt to limit access to books. Just to give a quick demonstration of that, in 2020, there were only 278 attempts around the country to limit access to books. In 2021, that number jumped to 3,916, so more than a tenfold increase in attempts.
That's insane.
It's alarming. And unfortunately, in addition to the attempt to limit access to books, there's also an increased harassment of librarians and library professionals around the books that are on the shelves in their libraries. The idea that is unfortunately growing is that librarians are trying to push a certain viewpoint on young people, on youth, whether this be LGBTQ books or books about race or characters of color. Really, what we want people to understand is, as youth services librarians, which is my background, we respect everyone. We want everyone to be able to see themselves in our collection. We want everyone to have access to all different ideas. It is not our job to push a particular viewpoint or a particular book. We are very respectful of what people are actually looking for. And we also know our collections deeply. So if a parent were to come in and say, my religious values are X, Y, and Z, and I'd like to access these types of books for my children, we make every attempt to take that family to the shelf and get exactly the books that they're looking for. You know, at the end of the day, we want everyone, it's about literacy, it's about the joy of reading, it's about finding books that mean something, and we want everyone to have that right, that same right.
And that, Michael, is why a study from Maine said that librarians are one of the most trusted professionals I think it was like librarians were ranked as second most trusted professional because they're like literally all as nice as that.
I'm so confused. It's not lawyers?
Dan, do you think that lawyers are the most trusted professionals?
I would have offered like veterinarians.
Okay.
True.
Anyone that makes animals healthy to me is just like the best person, followed by librarians.
So Dan, why do you think censorship is becoming such an issue in the United States right now?
Yeah, so we're the biggest publisher out there globally, and I think now more than ever we're trying to have our books reflect life, right? Books should reflect culture, and culture is in turn shaped by books. And so we're in an era now where we're trying more than ever before, in some ways, to make up for lost time, in the sense that America and the world is becoming increasingly less white, less straight, cisgender, all those things. People are now able to express themselves and be seen and heard like never before. We want books to reflect that. We want to reach those people, those audiences. We want to have those people become authors for us. And so it's no accident that in the last few years, where publishers have tried, again, more than ever before, to expand the scope of who's writing books and who's reading them, that's where the pushback is coming from, to keep the world small and homogenous. And it's coming at the local level and the state level and the national level.
I think that's a question I want clarified. Dan, you're not from Rhode Island, but you work on these issues nationally. But Cheryl, you do work in Rhode Island. Mm-hmm. Is this a national issue but not a Rhode Island issue, or are there challenges to books or censorship of books locally?
There's absolutely, and in Rhode Island, we've actually seen more attempts to limit books in schools rather than public libraries. And most notably, there was a case around the book Gender Queer at Westerly High School. The librarian there, Marianne Mirando, had the book on the shelf. It is a graphic novel, and it explores a non-binary teen, right? So what happened was a member of the community was upset at some of the illustrations in the book, raised a question, attempted to have it removed, went as far as to the state police, the attorney general, attempting to get that book removed. It is still on the shelves. The librarian stood up and said, no, we need to have books that reflect all of the identities in our school, in our community, and not even just in our community, but in the national community. So it is still there, but that was the most public and the biggest issue. There's been attempts in some towns to have the school board, review every book that's going to go on the shelves. So there's been different kinds of attempts like that are attempting to narrow the rights of people to access freely the information that they want to access in the library.
So on my own experience, I've seen from my own life how LGBTQ voices are the first that are silenced in these sort of book bans. Mm-hmm. How is your movement about protecting marginalized voices?
Well, I would say the genesis of the current book ban fever began post George Floyd. The Moms for Liberty, who is the main group of individuals that are, running around the country, disrupting schools and libraries everywhere, originally was an anti-vax, anti-mask movement. And when the political salience of that issue, waned, they looked for another culture war to begin. And so around that time, discussions about Black Lives Matters and systemic racism, historic and contemporary, were really taking off. So from my perspective, the earliest signs were when suddenly our authors were being disinvited from school visits at universities or high schools, typically books that were being labeled, quote unquote, critical race theory. That has morphed into DEI. 10 months from now, it'll be another catchphrase. And then it sort of spread, and it intensified, but it also spread. And then it was the LGBT books that came next. Again, I think it's just the timing of it is that's when people started, asserting their rights and their dignity in that community, and the pushback was powerful. So early on, there was a lot of pressure put against books that, you or I would think are like, they're not challenging. Gender Queer is a challenging text for young readers. But Uncle Bobby's Wedding, which is about a little kid whose Uncle Bobby's getting married, happens to be getting married to a man, but that's not the point of the story. The point of the story is that the young child is upset and confused. Are they going to have less time with their favorite uncle? That book is prolifically banned. Then you have a book like Tango Makes Three, which is the true story of a couple penguins in the zoo, that a couple male penguins that work together to incubate and raise an egg. We don't know what the penguin's sexuality is. I don't think they're capable of telling us, but to some that was LGBT coded, and that book is also prolifically banned. So it's really every type of LGBT story, even if it's not about LGBT themes, just the mere inclusion of people from that community is enough to trigger that type of pushback.
That makes me so incredibly sad. Cheryl, what on the ground does a book ban actually look like at a library like this?
So I think what it looks like, and I actually just got a statistic today from the American Library Association that 72% of attempts to ban books are from organized groups. It's not even individuals raising concerns. You know, I'm a parent, my child brought a book home, I'm concerned about it, I go to the library and I have a conversation. You know, why is this book included? A respectful conversation ensues, a decision is made, right? What's happening now is that lists of books are circulating. You know, we don't like these books for the same kinds of books that Dan is describing. You know, they get tagged. And then folks who are filing the complaints have not even necessarily read the book. They're just going on, you know, the word of a group like Moms for Liberty. That is a group that's active in Rhode Island. They're a group that produces a list. And so we see this sort of broad swath rather than this individual approach. I think 16% came from a parent or something like that in the past year. It's very, very limited individuals who are attempting to restrict access.
PEN America did a study, I think they found in either 2023 or 2024, that something like 90% of the activity was being generated by about 11 people. I think it was 11 people that were doing it. So this is not to say there's not people in every town that are trying to do this, but the gravity of it, the center of gravity is a very small group of people that are very insistent on removing works of literature, and not just novels, but nonfiction as well, from the shelves if it reflects experiences or ideas or individuals that they do not want their child exposed to.
And I just want to add to that, the thing that is so distressing is that, and what I've heard mentioned is that most children have access to a smartphone or online, and they're accessing all of these ideas, all of these things, and they actually can access actual pornography. And so when you're looking at a book, that is not what is included in the public library. And so when you're reading something, when you're slowly absorbing it, when you have a chance to really put it down and reflect, it's a completely different experience. And there's been endless studies about how that builds empathy and understanding. And it's not going to change you into something else, but it might change you into a more empathetic person who can understand another point of view. So it's that slower look, right? That it's just very wildly different than a constant visual image coming at you. And that's what's so surprising in many ways.
Yeah. Let me just say, if there was pornography in my library growing up, they would have to pry me out of that building, okay? That's not where I thought I was going to find the pornography, okay? So, I mean, the books that we're talking about are Ulysses. That gets caught in the dragnet all the time. And I remember, there's a famous case from 1933, United States versus a book called Ulysses. Bennett Cerf, the founder and publisher of Random House, sued the United States because the book Ulysses by James Joyce importation from Ireland was blocked by law. So he smuggled a copy in, arranged to get caught, and then challenged the banning. And the judge said, among other things, that if anyone can get the Ulysses to get to the sexy parts, like you tip your cap to them. If you're an 11-year-old, trying to work through all that prose, which I think adults honestly struggle with, like most kids are going to put the book down, and nowadays they'll go to the smartphone, right? So it's counterproductive. It's useless. It's really about trying to blockade off exactly that thing that Cheryl mentioned, which is empathy and compassion.
Yeah, if you had banned a book when I was a kid and I had a smartphone, it only would have made me more curious to go online and find the information that you didn't want me to read. It feels like it's going to backfire.
Yes. Absolutely. And that's the thing. In our Freedom to Read Coalition, the most powerful voices were the youth from Young Voices and from Arise, who spoke up and talked about the books that they had read that were often books that had been attempted to be banned, and spoke about the power of those books, the power of seeing themselves in literature, the power of them being able to talk about that and just frankly being seen, and how much that mattered. And these are the people, the young people are the ones that are most affected by this, right? And as a youth services librarian, I mean, we always say, I'm going to say something here, as a youth services librarian, I want kids to read whatever they're ready to read. I want them to even go to the adult collection if they're ready for it, right? However, in the end, parents have the right to set those limits for their kids and say this one and not this one. I wish every kid could just be launched free in the public library to read, research, and find. I was talking to a group of Brown University students in a literature class, and one young woman really struck me because she said, in my home, it was very conservative, so I didn't have any information about sexual health, about sex. And so I went to the library and I sat in the corner and I found the books that would explain it to me. And so her parents would not have let her borrow those books, but she was able to go into the library and access the information she needed for her, frankly, her own safety and her own health. So it's so important. It's actually a life and death matter in many cases. Young people being able to access the information they need, young people being able to see the alarming rates of suicide among LGBTQ youth, particularly trans youth. We should all be alarmed if we are caring human beings, right? And it's so powerful to see yourself and to feel like you are seen and heard and understood. And we cannot not have those books. They are literally life-saving. And now I'll get off my soapbox, but it's so important.
I think that sort of brings us to the recent Freedom to Read bill, which is now law in Rhode Island. Dan, can you take us through legally? So a book gets challenged, the book gets banned or censored or removed from a library. Generally, how do courts handle these challenges? Are there First Amendment rights? How does this usually work?
So book bans can take on different forms, but I would say there's two common denominators. One is viewpoint discrimination, which is just flat out forbidden under the law, which is when the government decides to play traffic cop and say to an author, your ideas are okay, but to author A and author B, I don't like what you're selling here. You're blockaded. Now, the freedom to speak and the freedom to read are inextricably intertwined. There's a great line from the Supreme Court case, Island Trees versus Pico. The dissemination of ideas can accomplish nothing if otherwise willing addressees are not free to receive and consider them. So that's the ball game there. My free speech is nothing if a tree falls in the woods and no one hears it, doesn't make a sound, right? The other component of book bans is, I think, increasingly where it's moving towards is the desire to stamp out those LGBT coming of age stories. They're looking for a neutral pretext. And so you can't just say only LGBT coming of age stories are blocked or inappropriate, because it raises that viewpoint discrimination. So what they say is, well, sex. We're just regulating sex here. We think these books are inappropriate or even quote unquote harmful to minors. That's a standard that shows up a lot now. And what they'll say is that the criteria are neutral, whether it's gay or straight or, neither, no sex, K to 12, that sort of thing. And that is the law. That is the law in Iowa. That's the law in Florida. You have Utah, South Carolina, Texas. It's all over the place. So it's a hostility to sex and sexuality that I think is really, like I said, it's a pretext. It's really just trying to get rid of those books that they don't want to see, but they don't always understand or grapple with or even care, frankly, that standard knocks out 1984. I mean, we love using the word Orwellian as lawyers, but literally this parents' rights movement that's an Orwellian term because it destroys the rights of parents to allow their children to read. It knocks out Slaughterhouse-Five, As I Lay Dying, Toni Morrison, James Baldwin. I mean, these are books that have been around for decades, or in the case of Ulysses, like a century, and books that we all grew up with. So it is an atom bomb that's being dropped on libraries, really out of concern to cover the few books that they really are genuinely worked up over.
One provision that stands out when I take a look at some of the cases is the idea of standing to challenge a book. Can you explain, what is standing, and how is the Rhode Island law moving that forward or not moving that forward?
Standing is a legal concept that is premised on the idea that courts should not be like roving arbiters of what's right and wrong, that they should only have what's called an actual case or controversy in front of them. So, there's many contexts that could be applicable to, me sitting in my house in New Jersey, not seeing a rule that I like passed in Rhode Island, for example. I'm not allowed to just inject myself into Rhode Island and get a ruling from a court if it has no personal effect on me. And that's really important, that courts limit their power, which is really extraordinary power, to actual people who are affected by circumstances that they can get relief from the court from. So when it comes to right to read, the standing question is, who has it? We have asserted that there are a lot of stakeholders when it comes to censorship. There is, I'll just start with the author. That's the most obvious. It's their free speech that's being violated. I think people undercount naturally, they have very little to go off of in terms of understanding how authors are living. It's mysterious to most of us, even in publishing. It's slightly still mysterious to me. It's a tough profession, and earning a living off of the strength of your ideas. And so an author has to be able to sell, right? Otherwise it's not viable. And I think people underestimate the degree to which libraries are really important sector economically for authors. Just because they're free to the users doesn't mean the books come for free. The library is purchasing them on behalf of those students. And that's really important. Students can't buy books for themselves. They don't have money. They don't have transportation. So it's very, very important that we rely upon those intermediaries, which are parents, educators, and librarians, to purchase those books and place them with students. That is how the author can prosper economically, but it's also the author's free speech, who they are speaking to. One of our author co-plaintiffs in a lawsuit challenging a censorship regime in Iowa is Laurie Hall Sanderson. Her book Speak it's a fictionalized telling of the very real sexual assault she suffered as a teenager. She wants to communicate to young people about the risks of sexual assault, how to protect oneself, but also, unfortunately, tragically, if it happens, how to heal from it. So it's not just about sales for her. It's about communicating ideas that are very core to who she is and her ambition to make the world a safer, healthier place. So the authors have standing from that perspective. We, as a publisher, Penguin Random House, are carrying that message. Publishers have historically been afforded standing to challenge book bans. That goes all the way back to Ulysses, when Bennett Cerf at Random House challenged. Then you start going down the line. So in all of our cases, we've included librarians or educators because, again, they are very important links in the chain. They don't have a right to read. It's not their right. But they do have a right under the First Amendment to not be confused about which things are fair game for young people to be offered in terms of literature. And then you go to parents. Parents obviously have skin in the game as well. They have a right to look after what their children are reading. And then you get to the bedrock, the students. This entire discussion is really about students. We never hear from them. We never ask them for their perspectives. Every single one that I've ever met says, whether they enjoy reading or not, whether they're going to the library, they feel very strongly that it's their choice, that they should have a say in it. All of these censorship laws and policies just completely take them out of the equation. They are infantilized. In Iowa, where there's a flat-out ban on sexual content, K-12, you have 18-year-olds that are treated the same as 6-year-olds. There is no difference under the law. If the book is deemed too challenging for the 6-year-old, the 18-year-old loses it too. These are people that have presumably had health class, that are under the law of their state, are able to consent to sex, are expected when they go off to college to have read many of the books that are now being blockaded from them. I mean, it's just so destructive to their ability to prosper as individuals. But so when we talk about standing, it's about making sure each of those people is represented before the court. And so far, every court that we've put that to has accepted every single one of those stakeholders as someone that has standing.
And so I think that there's a theme that sort of emerges, which is people think of this as like a library issue, but it ends up being a bookseller issue, an artist publisher issue, an artist author issue, an illustrator issue, a publisher issue, a librarian issue, a school issue, a university issue in some cases, any type of educator, any type of parent, any type of reader. And so I think like shrinking this to being a library issue is really doing it a disservice, because it's also a commerce issue. It's also a First Amendment issue. And so I really appreciate the both of you for sort of speaking on how big the issue really is, even though, you know, it exists in the realm of sort of, this is a library thing.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to the members of our coalition when we were working on getting the Freedom to Read bill passed this year. And Nicole, you were our amazing leader in pulling us all together. But we had book creators with the Authors Against Book Bans. We had the faith community through the Rhode Island State Council of Churches, the Jewish Alliance of Rhode Island, the Women Project, who focuses on bodily autonomy, the Rhode Island ACLU, the Center for the Book, the Providence Teachers Union, the League of Women Voters, the Library Association, and then 2 youth organizations. So it really was a broad coalition. And then from there, it fanned out to friends groups of the library, other members of the community. I think there were over 300 people who were truly involved in this effort. So it is a broad effort. And that's what it takes to get something like this passed and to move it along.
There was this amazing moment in one of the hearings where, you know, I don't know how often anyone who's listening testifies at a hearing in Rhode Island, but they sort of call you up in the order that you signed up. And so someone from the Rhode Island Council of Churches was sitting next to someone from the Rhode Island Atheists speaking on behalf of those 2 organizations. And another one of the advocates was like, well, I think everything that needs to be said has been said. Like, if those people can agree, surely the rest of us can. Let's move this forward. And I thought, like, yeah, that's like really beautiful. It's really beautiful to see people from all walks of life who sort of gather around. I would want to hear what's the other side. So Dan and Cheryl, like, who is for, and I think that the other side would object to the use of ban and would say who is censoring or restricting books. What are those arguments?
Well, I can just speak to what I heard testifying in at the Rhode Island State House. So what I heard was that there's fear among certain groups, certain parents, that their children are being exposed to books and materials that go against their own family's values. They seem genuinely worried that their children are going to encounter pornography. I think they're defining pornography in a very loose term. It might just be a lifestyle that they're not comfortable with, or an identity that they're not comfortable with. But this is what kept coming out. One of the moms spoke and said, you know, I had my children at the public library. I was working with a few of them, and I was afraid. I was so afraid. I've got a 7 or 9 year old was wandering around, and that they were going to, you know, encounter pornography. So I want to be respectful that people do have concerns and they want to uphold the values they hold as a family, and also at the same time understanding that every other parent has the same right. So I think that's the concern I hear, but we also need to hold the fact that there are other parents who hold very different viewpoints about what they would like their children or their family values or their religious background or whatever it is might be very different about what they want their children to read. And the library has to be this space of free inquiry where both are available, both, you know. So, and I think also I hear a real fear and lack of trust in public libraries, public schools, teachers, librarians, that they are pushing a certain agenda by having these materials available. And what I want to say is we are not telling anyone to take any certain books out. We are making the books available, and then folks have the free choice to take out what they would like to take out. So I do hear a genuine fear, which I can be empathetic with, but at the same time, I'm not sympathetic with the attempt to limit other people's rights to access what they would like to access.
Cheryl, here on the ground in Rhode Island, have you or any of your colleagues already faced these challenges? Is there a story that makes this really personal to you?
So in my library, it wasn't a book, but it was a program. So we were invited by an organization to host a story time, and it was with Brave Books, and we said we will not co-sponsor, but you can use our space. And that got conflated into a situation where we were not allowing them to use our space. And that was not true. We offered that they could use the space. And unfortunately, that came on the national news, and we received over 500 phone calls. I believe none of them were from Rhode Island, but calling us terrible names, wishing terrible things upon us. I have staff members who identify who are in the LGBTQ plus community who were devastated by the language of these calls. So I think it's not just books, it's programs, it's exhibit space, it's meeting room use, it's broader than just the materials. So that's how I personally experienced it, is watching how and this was now almost 2 years ago, so it's been a while, and we did not publicize it. We didn't want to give a further platform, so we just kind of quietly went about our business. But and then the example I shared in Westerly was another very public, and seeing and hearing from school librarians that they're actually afraid to put books in their collection because they don't want to be harassed. So a lot of times that does not get reported. It's just quiet. I'm going to choose not to buy that book because I'm afraid that I'm going to be called out. And honestly, that just chills me, that these public servants who genuinely care about youth, they genuinely care about families, are afraid that they're going to be harassed for selections, that they're using their professional judgment, professional review sources, everything they've been taught, and they're following the collection development policy that's been improved by their board. They're doing everything right, and they're afraid.
Dan, can I ask you, what kind of pressure do authors and illustrators and librarians and booksellers face when something controversial is on the shelves?
It's extraordinary pressure. I mean, I should say it's not just libraries that are experiencing this. It's schools, of course, but it's also bookstores. I mean, the state of Arkansas passed a law and enacted a law that would have criminalized bookstores if a young person came in and was exposed to material that somebody deemed harmful to them in a bookstore. So fortunately, our trade association filed suit and was able to block that law. But they're not stopping at the libraries. Tennessee passed a law that removed a safe harbor for librarians, that they could be found criminally liable for distributing obscenity, pornography. Same goes for booksellers, actually. Even here at Penguin Random House, laws have been passed that would impose criminal liability on us for selling a book to a school, where presumably the teacher or librarian wanted the book and felt it was right for them. So it's a tremendous chilling effect. We are being asked constantly by educational buyers, can we have a clean list? What are the books that aren't going to get us in trouble? And we say, well, respectfully, if we give you a clean list, it implies the existence of a dirty list. So we can't do that for you. But they feel their backs are up against the wall, and they are fighting for survival. How can I keep this library running, let alone flourishing? In New Jersey, my friend Martha Hickson, Librarian of the Year, was called a pedophile. And her board did not protect her. Her school board did not protect her. She was made to feel unsafe until, 1,000 people showed up for a school board meeting, and the community sent the message that this is one of our own, but it should never have come to that. So the pressure is just through the roof. Authors are left wondering, can I write this? Not only can I write this and not expect blowback against me personally, but will you as a publisher be there for me if it gets banned or challenged? And the answer for us is yes, because we have the resources to do that. But I can't take for granted that smaller presses can withstand the economic and legal pressure that now everyone is under.
Yeah, and I know I've heard from our Rhode Island authors and illustrators that some of them have been disinvited from events and face similar challenges like that.
We have Jeanette Bradley and Padma Venkatraman are two local authors. In one case, I think she illustrates her own books, who have faced the ramifications of this sort of soft censorship. So that's not someone going to the library and saying, hey, take this book off the shelf. But it is being disinvited, librarians or educators feeling afraid to invite them. And I always...
Can I just say?
Yeah.
we can only measure the removals and the disinvitations. We cannot measure the one that never gets invited in the first place.
Exactly.
And that is the phase of censorship that we are in. It is insidious. It is invisible to Americans, but it is very real because we can see the before and after. I know which authors have vibrant speaking engagement tours across the country, and then all of a sudden they're drying up. Or we're getting privately messages from school administrators saying, I'm so embarrassed, or, I'm so sorry, but we just can't. And this is how authors sell their books. This is how they connect with their audiences. It is critical to their ability to earn a livelihood at their profession.
My mom always tells a story about me when I was a little kid. So when I was growing up, my mom was at Fordham University, and she was finishing her PhD, and she was writing her dissertation. And it was she was not a big researcher. And as a little kid, obviously, I love libraries as much as I do now. And so she said to me, I will take you to the Fordham or Marymount Library with me. You help me with my research, and I'll allow you to take out any book of your choice, which was really meaningful to me at like age 11 because I had late fines at the school library and the local library. And I, wanted more books, obviously. And so she is a psychologist. She was reading in the psychology section. Next to the psychology section was the sociology section. And so I was like sitting on the floor, thumbing through books, and she said, okay, it's time to go. And I grabbed my book, and I'm like, this is the book I want to take out. And it was a book about lynchings. And my mom was like, why don't we talk about this? Like, are you sure this is the book you want to take out? And I was like, what is this? What is a lynching? Tell me about this. It also had some pictures, and she explained what lynching was. And I said, okay, but like, why would someone do that? And that same person, and she let me take the book out. And that same person is the me who I am now, who became a librarian and became a lawyer and who teaches a race and the law class. When we limit people's access to information, even that information that maybe you wouldn't choose to read, and maybe that information that someone might deem inappropriate, when we let parents make the decisions and parent their children as they see fit, and I could see people who might totally disagree with what my mom did, you may see that those people feel seen, heard, motivated, and inspired in ways that totally change everything. And I didn't grow up to be a lyncher or a serial killer. I grew up to be a race law professor. And I'm so darn proud of the fact that I co-authored a race law book. And so I think that we're sometimes underestimating what the power of story can do. And that's why I'm like really proud of this legislation. And so I guess my question, all of that by saying, my question is, by passing the Freedom to Read legislation in Rhode Island, our state is now on the cutting edge. So Dan, can you talk a little bit about why I say that and what's different about Rhode Island's Freedom to Read statute?
Sure. And first, I'd like to say, building off of what you said, there are no subjects off limits to kids. The book banning movement wants us to believe that kids are not ready to hear about certain things like sex, sexuality, violence, et cetera. By the way, there's no book bans based on violence. So this is like, let's just get that out there. We have a very violent society, but that does not animate the protective instinct the same way that sex and sexuality does. But I think a lot about my own children, and every single new parent at some point gets the question from their kid, Mom, Dad, how are babies made, right? So you're having a discussion about sex, but it's a very different discussion than would take place, 10 years later when they're in health class, right? So the concept's not off limits. No concepts are off limits. Racism, slavery, war, kids can hear about it. Now, we want to give it to them in a way that they can understand and digest, and it isn't going to intimidate, confuse, upset them. That's important. My own daughter, my older daughter, is a read ahead type person, and sometimes she'll get to a book where she realizes a little more than she intended to bite, a bit more than she chew up, and she'll put it down and say, "I'm going to come back to that." That's fine too. So no topics are off limits. Kids can hear about people in their community. They don't have to pass some magic age threshold to hear about the existence of a trans person. That's absurd. So pivoting to how to address that legislatively. what we're seeing now is a retreat from those principles I talked about, which is no viewpoint discrimination, and don't label books pornographic when they have what we call serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value. That is the so-called Miller test from Miller versus California, 1972. So we have very enduring standards. So a good freedom to read law will enshrine PICO, no viewpoint discrimination, and Miller, common sense obscenity regulation. Books that are prurient, titillating, that are offensive, and that lack that value for that age range, absolutely no place in a library. You're not going to hear an argument from us as a publisher. But when a kid wants to read it and they're ready and it has that value, you can't stand in the way. So that to me is like the table stakes for a good law. The Rhode Island law has both those elements. The other aspect I think that's important is due process. Let's have an orderly process. Let's not have people from out of town or out of state or out of country coming in, jetting in, helicoptering in and deciding I need to become the library auditor. So the Rhode Island Freedom to Read law limits those challenges, people that we call having a vested interest, people with skin in the game, the students, their parents, the actual community members for a public library. I think that's tremendously important. It'll cut down on those harassing, out of district challenges. And then when you have a challenge, there should be a clear process so that the challenger who may be earnest in their intent, I do agree with Cheryl that sometimes this is driven by a sincere concern or fear. And then let's have a clear pathway for discussion so that they have a structured discussion with the librarian. It helps the librarian and it helps the parent or community member to get through. But while that is playing out and while that book is being reviewed, don't remove it from the shelf. Leave it there unless and until it is found inappropriate for that age range. And if it is, you move it to the next highest group or out of the library if it's a school and it's just too much. I don't know. If Lady Chatterley's lover somehow made it into an elementary school library, okay, let's move it to a more appropriate place.
I just want to say I'm in awe of all of you. As a queer kid growing up in the 70s and 80s, where there were no books that represented me. I can't imagine how powerful it would have been to have a law in place like this that would have allowed those books to be on the shelves. So many people in my age group contemplated self-harm, completed self-harm, and this is so much less isolating. The work you have all done has been incredibly powerful, and we thank you.
Thank you.
Well, you're giving me goosebumps here. I didn't know I knew a lot of gay people growing up, but I didn't know which ones they were. I lived in a town filled with closeted people who did not they feared what would happen to them if they came out. And so it wasn't until I came to college that I met people that were, lived in their own skin comfortably. And I didn't feel that ready for it. I didn't know how to talk to them, how to be compassionate, because I hadn't read about it either, right? So these things are not just, we call them windows and mirrors. To a young LGBT kid, it's a mirror. They need to see themselves. They need to see an older version of themselves that's happy and well-adjusted and loved. But to someone like me, I need a window. I need to see what life is like for someone that maybe I do know but didn't realize it, or maybe I haven't met them yet. But I want to be ready for that so that I can, be fully present and understanding of whatever they are carrying. So these things help everybody. They don't just help the gay kids. They help the straight kids or the kids that are not quite sure what they are yet. They help the adults, frankly. Some of these adults could really benefit from reading a couple of these books. Justice Alito comes to mind. And I think that, we have to have an orderly process. We have to protect the books. We have to protect the librarians. Rhode Island Freedom to Read has provisions protecting librarians. They cannot be disciplined, even threatened for discipline for doing their job. If they are disciplined or, God forbid, fired, then they have recourse to get their job back, get their back pay, and prevent it from happening again. So to me, that is non-negotiable, because when we talked about standing earlier, we have to make sure that each person in that chain between author and student, they not only have rights, but they have recourse. I don't believe in giving people rights if there's no recourse. You could tell me I have the right to be published in the library, but if there's a violation, what do I do about it? Well, in Rhode Island, this is the critical thing. Now you can sue. So whereas before you'd have to go straight to federal court, do not pass go directly to federal court. You're playing, in some places, a game of roulette with which judge you get. I have found that the vast majority of judges of all political stripes actually are super supportive of the right to read. They are recognizing it. But even such, federal court is incredibly expensive. It is not fast. And meanwhile, the book's off the shelf. And we have a student plaintiff in Iowa, Haley Bonds, who was the first, as far as I know, I believe is the first student to sue her state for a book ban ever. And tremendous courage. She graduated. She's done. She's now in college and can read freely. But that's not fast justice for her. Mm-hmm. And so we wanted to get this into the state court system where people could actually have a chance to get the books back and do it on a reasonable time frame. And so Rhode Island is the very first to explicitly create a private right of action. There's something that, lawyers love torts. Torts like you ran over my foot, that's negligence, that sort of thing. Well, there's a tort in Rhode Island. It's called censorship. And it identifies removing or restricting or hiding or preventing the acquisition of books for political purposes as a civil offense. And if you are a student or a parent or critically an author, you can bring a claim and say, get the book back on the shelf, or put it there in the first instance if that's the reason why it's not there. So that is real, that puts real teeth into the law. Other states have passed laws that forbid ideological book bans, but there was just no recourse for an individual to vindicate their own rights. So I'm so proud that the group of people came together in Rhode Island and welcomed being a Random House and me into the mix, because we're seeing it across the country. And I'm like, well, gee, these are the tools I wish I had in the 4 cases I'm currently litigating. This is a genuine game changer, and I think it'll be a real deterrent. And that's the last piece of it. Let's actually stop these things from happening, because here's the fact pattern. I'm run for school board. I don't talk much about what my agenda is. People that ask don't even know to ask. I get there and I start just pulling books. And then what do? How do you stop it? Well, 3 years later, when my term's up, you could replace me, but the damage has been done. Mm-hmm. So there's no skin in the game. And I hope that, there's what's the Martin Luther King, a riot is the cry of the unheard, a lawsuit is the cry of the unheard lawyer. Mm-hmm. Lawsuits can be deterrents. There are districts in Florida that have spent close to $500,000 defending book bans that they are going to lose, that they are already in the process of losing. And you just hope that prevents that type of behavior in the future. I hope that people realize that you can either do your book bans or have the football field, but not both.
So that is a positive note for us to end on. I mean, I think the corollary to that is to thank Rep Morales and Senator McKinney and the Speaker of the House and the Senate President for allowing this bill to come to the floor. And also we had so much support in the legislature. But we also end all of our episodes on something fun. So Michael and our guests, what is your favorite banned book?
The Color Purple. My mother gave it to me young. I think I was probably 10 or 11, and it completely changed my way of viewing the world. I don't even think she fully understood what she was giving me, but that's the point.
I could answer this question 1,000 ways, but my answer is the picture book Planting Stories. Because I just became familiar with it while doing this advocacy work, and it's by a Rhode Island author,
right,
about a librarian.
Yeah.
About Pura Belpre, and it is beautifully illustrated, really touching, and that is what every little girl or boy or person who wants to become a librarian or loves books should read, and I love it. What about you?
So I have 2. My first one is Forever by Judy Blume, which we used to read at every sleepover down in the basement, right, out loud to each other, which is ridiculous, but that's my first one. And I love The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas, which was a Reading Across Rhode Island selection because unfortunately it deals with the shooting of a young Black teenager, but it allows you to explore it through the young people, the parents. It just really is an exploration of the pain and how it's handled. So I have 2.
And shout out to Angie Thomas, who is a co-plaintiff with Penguin Random House and a number of other publishers, challenging a Florida law that bans that title and hundreds of other books. And we felt that put such a fine point on it, that what are the real dangers to kids? Like the book talks about the real danger to kids: violence, Lori Hall Sanderson, sexual assault. Like those to me are the things that we have to protect kids from. And because we lose those books because it has something else, discussion of race or sexuality is really something is being lost in the equation. My favorite banned book to talk about, I will say, is Slaughterhouse-5. And I'm going to read for you a piece of a transcript from when I was deposed by a lawyers for a Florida school district. They were trying to get me to prove that these books are just too damn sexy for the high school audience. So if you'll just indulge me. They made me talk about 30 books. Question: and you've read Slaughterhouse-5, correct? Answer: yes. I believe it was probably 21 years ago, but has rattled around in my brain in the ensuing decades. Question: okay, do you agree? Answer: I did read it as a high school student. It was actually assigned reading to me by I believe it was my 11th grade English teacher. And I would like to represent that I've led a full and interesting life since then and have not suffered any impairments having encountered this book. Question: do you recall a passage in Slaughterhouse-5 stating he had a dirty picture of a woman attempting sexual intercourse with a Shetland pony? Answer: it sounds consistent with my recollection of the book. Question: would you agree that is a depiction of bestiality? Answer: no, I actually wouldn't go that far. I think that Slaughterhouse-5 is, one of the strengths of it is as a work, is that it's meandering and discursive, metaphoric and symbolic. It's magical realism. I don't think anything on the page should be read as in a literal sense. So if you told me, I don't know, 21 years ago that I would be responsible for recounting the Shetland pony part of Slaughterhouse-5, or to give a decent synopsis of what the book is about, because I remember being very confusing then, I would have said you're crazy. I think it tells us where we've gotten to as a country, but also that all of us can be a part of this. I didn't get into publishing to work on this issue. It kind of came to me. So I love the sense that we are together with librarians, faith leaders, ACLU, students, parent groups. We're all here. We're all figuring it as we go. So I just love that aspect of the fight for intellectual freedom.
So thank you all. And thank you to our listeners. And if you've ever been changed by a book, you're part of the story, and we would love to hear about that. You can find out ways to contact us in the show notes. Let us know your favorite banned book, your favorite libraries, or your favorite librarians. Subscribe to the Law 401 podcast, or wherever you get your podcast, Apple, Amazon, YouTube, you name it. And remember, leave us a review. And remember, the law isn't just in the courtroom. It's in your library too.
And in your heart.
If you're interested in attending law school, Roger Williams University School of Law is hosting a law fair at the Providence Marriott on September 12th. Over 50 law schools will be in attendance. To register, go to law.rwu.edu and scroll down to events. We hope to see you there. Thanks for tuning in to the Law 401 Legal Issues Decoded podcast from Roger Williams University School of Law. We'd like to thank our guests on today's show. The Law 401 podcast wouldn't be possible without the generous funding from the Hassenfeld Family Foundation. We'd also like to thank our executive producer from RWU Law, Helga Melgar, the RWU Marketing and Communications team, and our production partners, Focus Forward Media and the Half Street Group. The opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views of Roger Williams University or our partners. For more Law 401 episodes and updates, visit law.rwu.edu, YouTube, or follow us wherever you listen to your podcasts.